Welcome to Talk of the Bay. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman, and I'm here with Wallace Baine of Lookout Santa Cruz. And we're here to take a backwards look at 2022 before it ends up truly in the rearview mirror. And I thought we would start out with the most recent stories, maybe that you covered and I covered, and sort of do a year in review. And I know you cover a lot of cultural stories, so we'll hear about some of those. I thought we'd start with the most recent election because that's still kind of fresh in people's minds.
Very much so. Thank you for having me, Rachel. Yes, 2022, we forget, was a big election year, both in the June election and the November election. And I remember when I first started at Lookout, I remember one of the pitches I was doing to the community was, look, we've all had it up to here with news out of Washington and the Trump stuff. Let's turn all that off. This was after the 2020 election, and let's focus locally, and let's figure out what's going on in our local neighborhoods. Well, I mean, we've done that, and we've found out that there's divisions here in Santa Cruz County, perhaps not as pronounced as in the country at large, but still very real nevertheless. And these elections kind of showed those a little bit.
I've been listening to a lot of interviews lately, and the one common theme I keep hearing is that people are on edge still, and or more so even now that we're kind of sort of back to so-called normal. So one kid that was interviewed on the Kooky Side of Crazy last week said there's fights every lunchtime at Santa Cruz Middle School at Mission Hill. And he said that never used to happen. And I've heard this from people in high school as well, and some of my college
Yeah.
students, that the emotional state of people is not really that great, and they're really edgy and really easy to get angry. That's the only way I can characterize it, sort of reactive.
That
And
makes sense to me.
yeah,
That really makes sense to me. I mean, yeah, sure, elections come and go, pandemics come and go even, but the social and media environment that we've created for ourselves is always on and is always going to create this kind of churn in people, no matter what the political season has in store. So yeah.
I'm glad I'm not imagining it. I wish I was. So we had a couple breakthroughs in the election as far as gender and race goes. We had the first woman ever from Santa Cruz County win the assembly seat for this district, which includes Morgan Hill now, Gail Pellerin. That was a pretty big deal. And she started because there was a group I was part of called Breaking the Glass Ballot that encouraged people to run. And someone said to Gail, well, if you're encouraging other people to run, why don't you run? And she said, oh, you're right. I guess I should run. And the rest is history. But it's really neat to see the culmination of all that kind of behind the scenes work bear fruit, so to speak.
Right. And her opponent was a woman as well. So, and that election wasn't close. Gail Pellerin is pretty popular in this area. Certainly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but she had to campaign in places that didn't know her, like Morgan Hill and Los Gatos, and places farther afield, and she did great.
Right. Right.
And we had Justin Cummings win what looked like a squeaker, ended up not being quite as squeaky, and it ended up in his favor. But it also showed you how long it takes for ballots to get counted. And there was some interesting back and forth on Lookout. I noticed about are you labeling the progressives a bunch of procrastinators, or are they thoughtful and want to take their time? Seemed kind of like Monday morning quarterbacking to me. But
Right.
I saw some of the letters, I'm like, does it matter? He won.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I did a whole lot of coverage of the Measure O debate, which was, I think, really, I mean, it perhaps it wasn't a factor in the Pellerin race, but it was a big factor in the third district supervisor race, certainly in the mayoral race that Fred Keeley won, and also just kind of the ballot measure itself was really something that everybody, certainly in the city of Santa Cruz, was debating and wrestling with. And much like Measure D back in June, it really kind of pitted neighbor against neighbor a lot of times, and it was one of these. I mean, Measure O had so many different moving parts to it, I mean, from the farmers market to the heritage trees on the lot, to how people felt about libraries, to how people felt about construction generally. It was really an effective mirror held up to the community, on how they felt about change in Santa Cruz. And that was, of course, the big theme I saw this year throughout the year here in Santa Cruz is visible, real change in terms of construction, and the city kind of undergoing this kind of transformation before our eyes. And it's really only the beginning.
Yeah, we're going to see a lot more of it. And people have very strong opinions about that. And I don't think that necessarily the loss of Measure O was a big old thumbs up for giant buildings. And that's why Fred Keeley ran actually on the promise that he was going to hold, who's going to immediately bring up this height limit for tall buildings.
Right, right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
And we
word
have a mayor.
skyscrapers was thrown around, and that was kind of certainly a scary word for a lot of people around here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what are some other things? I mean, it's not like 2020, 2022 was its own thing. We were still in the pandemic. We didn't completely abandon masks. Cabrillo, we're still teaching in them. So what are some other things further back before the election that you covered that kind of, you know, typified the year, if you will?
Well, I think back at the very beginning of the year, almost a year ago now, we were all dealing with the Omicron stuff, and that was coming on strong. And we've almost forgotten all that now. But I remember Actors Theater came back with A10s at 8, and they had to pull the plug on that and cancel it at the last minute because of Omicron, essentially. And I mean, that was something that felt like it was 2 years ago from this vantage point. But yeah, that happened this year.
And
We
that's really
forget.
exemplary of the kind of tone I think people might be on edge about, which is you plan big things and you completely have to pull the plug on them, right? You spend hours writing a play and you can't put it on, or you get the act together for a benefit concert, you have to cancel it. So that was still happening a lot at the beginning of 2022.
Not so much now. Not so
Yeah.
much now. I think
Yeah.
we've kind of turned a corner a little bit on that. So that's certainly something to think about. And also, I remember, we forget at the beginning of this year, we said goodbye to India Joe's. That was the popular downtown restaurant that was not just a popular restaurant, but a kind of iconic meeting place for university culture going back to the 70s, really. And Joe Schultz had kept it going for so long, but the clock ran out on him at the beginning of January this year, and that seems like a long time ago now, also.
Yeah, and it's somewhat connected to that big tall building on Front Street too, because his building was going to get condemned. I think he would have had to move. So he just said, forget it, I'm going to pack it in instead of try to find a new venue. I think I
Right.
have that right.
Yes, right. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's part of the change or the domino effect that one big project can have on a whole area of the downtown. I don't hear anybody crying about Taco Bell though.
No,
Going away. I bet
no.
there's a few who really love that archway at the Taco Bell.
Yes.
A lot of people after
Oh, the
school.
Taco Bell and the Salvation Army and
The
the
head
escape
shop.
room, and yeah, all that stuff is gone. I guess probably the biggest and most ambitious story I did this year was, we called it 6 Blocks, and it had to do with all the development that was happening along the Front Street corridor there. And this is something we have seen go up right before our eyes. You know, our offices are right next to that. In fact, the building that we occupy now is also condemned. It is going to be rebuilt into something else at some point. So we were right in the midst of all this stuff. And so I kind of touched on something that people sort of vaguely knew in the back of their minds, but didn't know specifically what exactly was being built, where, and when it was scheduled to come online. So we kind of mapped out all of those buildings, the ones having to do with affordable housing, the ones with market rate housing, the hotel that's going in there, all that stuff, and just kind of try to illustrate what an incredible facelift this is going to be for the city, for positive and negative, you know, however you feel about that. It is going to look and feel a whole lot different. And a lot of people have felt that Santa Cruz will lose some of its identity, some of its soul by that kind of development. And I mean, who's to say? Who's to say? But it could be a huge success. It could be a huge boondoggle, Rachel. I mean, we've seen development in downtown Santa Cruz, the Rittenhouse building on Pacific Avenue. I mean,
I was just going to say that.
oh my gosh, what is that? 10 years now? That thing has just kind of been this white elephant where, you know, the idea that you will build it and they will come didn't really work in that regard. And the city is gambling that retail and business is going to return to that area once they redevelop it. So that's a big question going forward, I think.
Is that also connected to thoughts about a permanent stadium? I haven't heard much about that lately, but that's kind of in that part of North Pacific or whatever, South Pacific Avenue. Not
Sure,
sure.
you're talking about the basketball arena, right?
Yeah.
Yes. This is still very much up in the air. I think it probably will happen. The Warriors, the Golden State Warriors, who own the Santa Cruz Warriors, they want it to happen. They want to build a arena down there, but they're going to probably ask for certain guarantees from the city about what might be built down there as well. And so that's still off in the distance, but that'll be kind of the next phase of that development down there. I think the buildings that are currently going up now, once those get occupied, you might get a sense of what it's going to be on Lower Pacific and south of Laurel a little bit, but that's still quite a bit of what
It does
the
strike
future.
me that, sorry to interrupt. It strikes me that the land that they're building all this on, as well as the stadium and where it would be, are incredibly vulnerable to floods and earthquakes. You know, that's on, what do they call, liquefaction action kind of soil that when it
Yeah.
jiggles, it's wet sand and it collapses. And I was wondering if, you know, there's some special engineering going into any of these, because we saw what happened during 89. And I don't know if engineering's come that far, but I do wonder. And also with climate change and rising sea levels, it's right next to the river and right below the levee, this new stadium would be. So it does make me think about long term, which might only be 30 to 50 years.
Yes, I know. That is an interesting question to look at. How disaster proof is all this new development? You know, I mean,
There's your next story, Wallace.
there's my next story. I mean, a lot of it is being built right on the river levee, you know.
It is.
And that's the other big gamble here. As you know, so many people have tried to quote unquote revive or revivify, the levee along the San Lorenzo River, and it just hasn't worked. People just don't want to go over there, and it's not comfortable for a lot of people for recreational purposes for whatever reasons. And this new development is gambling that that's going to change. And they're going to be developing along the river to try to make it more appealing to people, but it's going to have to take a leap of faith among people to kind of reclaim that part of town. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I don't know.
Ask the folks at the tannery how that's going, and you'll get some answers.
Right.
That's an interesting
Right.
question. Will people living somewhere, prevent abuses of the land by people who are squatting or whatever they're doing there, drug
Yeah.
dealing? It's a
Yeah.
good question. I'm speaking with Wallace Baine, a recent and former and hopefully future again host here on K Squid, and Rachel Ann Goodman. We're on Talk of the Bay talking about the year in review. Yes, it is one of those shows because the first of the year is not very far off. 2023 looms, so it's good to take stock of the recent year as it passes. What else was notable, maybe in the cultural scene, that you wrote about that you really found fascinating?
Well, one thing I wrote about was the retirement of the great Morgani. Frank Lima, who we all know and love, decided he was going to hang up the spandex outfits, and that probably got more reaction from any story I wrote this year.
Well,
And
he had so many costumes. And for anyone listening who's that new to Santa Cruz that you never saw him, you maybe saw pictures of him. He was the guy with the accordion and the spandex costumes that seemed to defy gravity and reality, but they were very creative. And he had,
head to toe costumes also. He was masked
yeah,
all the time also. It was a very unsettling. I mean, if you had never seen him before, it was kind of a little freaky, like, wow, who is this and what's he doing? But he is iconic in these parts and beloved. And he turned 80 and he decided, now's the time.
he
So
didn't stand around holding a heavy accordion covered head to toe with spandex anymore. That was very brave of him to
it's
do.
hard work, Rachel, I'm telling you.
The hardest busking job. It's almost like the guys who paint their face with metallic paint and pretend to be statues, because the number of people who wanted their picture taken with him were legion.
Yes. Yes. So that happened, and that was sad, but Frank is still around and still doing well. So we hope he'll pop up in some other guise. I don't know, but on the cultural front, there were a lot of interesting stories. One of the stories that I kind of liked was kind of local playwrights stepping up and getting big productions out of their plays. I'm thinking of Kate Hawley, had a play produced by Jewel Theater in the spring, and then Kathy Pachetkovich in Santa Cruz Shakespeare over the summer. And these are local folks. They're our friends and neighbors, and there's, as you know, there's a lot of writers, playwrights in our community, and getting something staged is kind of a holy grail for a lot of them. And these two women experienced that, and they were both terrific plays. Kathy's play up at Santa Cruz Shakespeare this summer, she had a staged reading of it a couple of years ago before COVID, and that got a lot of buzz. So they decided they were going to do a full staging on it. And it was a huge hit, and it was the thing to see in the summer. Go up and see her play at Santa Cruz Shakespeare. It was a big hit.
That's so fantastic. And the bigger story was theater is back in general. Live theater was back. People, Shakespeare had its thing live. And for a lot of people, it
Yes.
had been 2 years since they'd been to anything at all.
Yes, that's right. It looked normal, Santa Cruz Shakespeare this year. It looked back to what it was in 2019. Last summer in 2021, it was small crowds, small casts. They were playing it safe. This year, they just kind of loosened their belt a little bit, and everybody loved to see that. And I mentioned Actors Theater earlier, and the 810s uh, disaster, really. Well, they also, went through a lot this year in terms of change of leadership, but they did eventually stage their season. It was September instead of January, but they did stage their season, and they are aiming to get back to quote unquote normal come January of 23. So yeah, theater has gone through a lot in the last couple of years in this community, and I'm frankly surprised that all of them are still standing, but they are. Jewel is as ambitious as they've ever been, and Santa Cruz Shakespeare is going to be doing big, ambitious plays again next summer. So, and Actors Theater is back too. So maybe that's a thing that we're going to see in the 20s now, a springboard into new kinds of performance art here, because we could use it.
We could definitely. So I want to look at the music scene now because I know that's something you also cover. And did all the clubs make it through the crucible of COVID, or did we lose some venues?
Well, we lost one venue, but not because of COVID, because of a kitchen fire. Michael's on Main in Soquel closed down. That is a temporary situation. They probably will reopen at some point, but they have been closed for some months now. The clubs, have come back. I don't think they're quite as robust as they were in 2019. A lot of them are still trying to find their way, but I think they're still bringing in a lot of great acts, and I don't think we've really lost any of the venues that I can remember. I hope I'm not forgetting somebody obvious.
I'm hoping some of them took advantage of those, emergency loans and COVID,
Oh, sure.
venue arts things that were offered. It's interesting. The one, and I don't think this is necessarily COVID's fault. It might be our immigration policy. But one thing I've heard from traveling international musicians is they can't tour here anymore. Like it's just impossible to get the right visas and permission to play here. So we've seen a really big cutback in groups like Vessen, from Sweden, or well, they broke up, but if they were together, or big African acts that would come over in the past. And I'm hoping that's temporary, but I've been hearing that story. Maybe that's another thing to cover is, where did all these people go? They're not touring the United States, they're not California.
Wow, the international acts, right? I believe Ladysmith Black Mambazo played here last month, right?
Okay, so
So
that's
there are
there are
some of
some.
that coming through, but they are a bigger name.
It may be just like the after effects of the Trump regime where countries were deemed as whole countries and they just couldn't get here. But I'm hoping that's all it was and they can get here now. But we deserve to hear wonderful acts from other parts of the world. So
We need to hear wonderful acts from other parts of the world.
absolutely,
Absolutely.
definitely so. Well, that's good to hear. And of course, the California Honey Drops were here last week and sold out the Catalyst. And Hari Kondabolu is coming with his comedy act. So the Catalyst is definitely rocking down there as they normally do.
Sure.
And then we've had lots of benefits, I noticed, happening for different musicians that fell on hard times during COVID or the CZU fires. There was a great Nancy Griffith tribute that sold out. That was for Yuji Tojo.
Sure. Uh-huh.
A lot of
Yeah.
musicians came out for Mary McCaslin's memorial. That was a big event.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
So there's been these gatherings, for other people, charitable outpourings of love and help. And
Yeah.
that's what makes this music community here very special. Is that
That's kind of always been the case in Santa Cruz, and I should mention our dear departed friend Mary McCaslin, because she was central to so many of those. You remember going back 20, 25, 30 years, how, if there was a benefit to help somebody out, Mary was sign me up every time. She was one of those people that would always come out to events, always be there to support other musicians, even, other theater and, other kind of events. Audrey Stanley was another one of those people that we lost this year. The founder of Shakespeare Santa Cruz, who was a absolute omnipresent person at events, constantly there to show up and to support theater, music, what have you. And I think back on this year, and I think how large both Audrey and Mary stood in this community, not only as people who, put great things on the stage, but as supporters. And I think that's what we should not forget about both of them.
Wallace, we just have a minute left of our time together, and I look forward to future conversations just like this in the coming year. In the minute left, just any parting thoughts for our audience that you'd like to share as we close out 2022?
Well, I think we're going to look back on this year at one point, maybe 5-10 years from now, and look at it as the year that Santa Cruz began to change. And changing Santa Cruz is going to be a focus of mine going into 2023. And we'll see where it takes us, maybe both the positive economic or the negative economic aspects of that. But it feels like a moment when the roller coaster is cranking up and leaving the station. So we'll see where it goes.
It's going to go up and it might go down. We'll find out. But there's always that bumper sticker, keep Santa Cruz weird. And thank you for keeping it interesting for all these years, Wallace Baine. Appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.